What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Today's video is the final installment of the Stat Focus series where I cover every available 7-star champion of a specific class for the year 2025 in the month of January and February. Now, Mystic is the last class, and there are no Mystics coming out in February, so luckily I don't have to cover or predict any stat focuses for those champions. But I do want to cover Science really quick just to gloss over or Falcon Joaquin Torres. I think he'll probably want either block proficiency or critical rating on offense, and then defense doesn't really matter. I don't think he's going to be much of a defender, but just wanted to cover that really quick. Let's get into Mystic, the final class here. Just jumping right into it. First of all, we have America Chavez. So, America Chavez has a pretty high critical rating and critical damage rating. So I think the best stat focus for Chavez would probably be the special damage rating. Just increasing her overall special attack damage makes a lot of sense because she already has a really high crit rating. So more special damage makes a lot of sense for Chavez. And then defensively, I like to run Pierce for Chavez because she can be pretty annoying on defense. But it would not be the worst idea to run physical or energy. Moving on to Diablo. Diablo, sort of an exclusive champion, sort of not. He's been in a lot of special crystals since being introduced in 2023 as a gifted guardian. But Diablo's really cool. He doesn't necessarily need any specific stat focus, so if you wanted to give him a nice little bonus on offense, I think block proficiency would be great. I also think special damage or even just the adrenaline healing would be great for Diablo. And then defensively, doesn't really matter. I think armor's fine. Block pen is also fine. Dragon Man, really fun character, still solid, not necessarily as good as he once was, but still a very solid champion. Dragon Man definitely benefits from the critical rating stat focus. He has a very low base crit rate, so bumping that up makes a lot of sense for him. And then defense, I think Pierce makes a lot of sense, but if you want to run armor, Dragon Man has a relatively high base armor rating, so increasing that even further makes him even tankier. So Pierce or armor makes sense for Dragon Man. Ebony Maw. So I have special damage stat focus running on Ebony Maw, and I think that makes sense offensively. Defensively, I think Pierce is great, but also giving him physical resistance would bring his physical resistance from the negatives into the positives, and that is a huge bonus. Negative physical resistance or negative resistance of any kind really hurts champions, even if it's just a little bit. You really notice it compared to having either neutral or positive resistance of any kind. So I think physical resistance is likely the best thing for him on defense. And then offensively speaking, I think you could also run physical resistance, that's fine, but special damage makes a lot of sense. Also, natural sig 100. Definitely fun. Enchantress. So, Enchantress is a great defender. One of the best defenders in the entire game. And Pierce makes the most sense for her. You're blocking a lot of hits from Enchantress, whether it's special attack hits, baiting basics so you can heavy counter her. Whatever the case may be, you're blocking a lot of hits for Enchantress. So that's what I think is the best for her on defense. And then offense doesn't really matter. Critical rating is fine. I also think that special attack rating is great because she gets a critical rating bonus during her special 2 with her like max amount of spells. She gets a critical rating increase. So increasing the overall damage of the special attack does make a lot of sense for Enchantress. Deathless Guillotine, very easy pick here. Run the critical rating stat focus. The more crits, the better, even with diminishing returns. Just having that increase to your critical rating on offense makes a lot of sense for Guillotine. And then defensively, does not matter. She is a non-defender. She is a pure attacker, so just run Pierce. Isophene. We got her for free, and we got her Awakened for free. Okay, the Awakening wasn't free, but the initial grab of Isophene was free, and I have her up at rank 2. I think she's pretty cool. I do think she's very geared towards cosmic champions with a lot of buffs. I wouldn't want to use her in any other matchup, but for a matchup against the cosmic class where there's a lot of buffs to take care of, Isophene feels great. Offensively, I think critical rating makes a lot of sense. She does have a lot of energy vulnerabilities to place on the opponent, so more and more crits, especially during that big special 2, is obviously the best for her. And then defensively, I think anything is fine. Energy resistance, increasing that even further would not be bad. I have armor, so you can run whatever you want on defense. Juggernaut. Insane champion. Just unbelievable how he was allowed to stay the way he is because he is so cracked, so broken. I think the best stat focus for him offensively is crit. He hits really hard with that special 2 Fury. So having that special 2 crit and then basics following the special 2 crit, yeah, makes a lot of sense. And then defensively, Pierce is fine. Kushala. So Kushala is a champion that I recommend running the armor penetration stat focus for on offense, just because she doesn't benefit from critical rating or special attack rating. All of her damage is dealt to the opponent as damage over time debuffs or damage over time effects. So just increasing the damage of all of her hits, basic hits, special hits, relics, the whole 9 yards with the armor penetration makes a lot of sense to me when running Kushala. So that's why I'd run with her on offense. And then defense, Pierce is fine, but if you wanted to increase her energy or physical resistance even further, that would also be a great shout. I think physical is a nice thing to run for defense. So I'm going to keep that. Long shot. Long shot, again, very similar to Kushala, does not necessarily benefit from any particular offensive stat focus. So running something like armor penetration to just increase the damage of all attacks makes sense for long shot. And then defensively speaking, I think Pierce is fine. Any of the resistances would also be good. And also special damage would not be bad on defense. Mangog. Mangog is another champion that I would recommend running Armor Pen on. But if you wanted to run critical rating, you could also do that because he has a 5% native critical rating. So basically doubling it with the stat focus. Not a bad idea. Not a bad idea at all. Although you're not really using Mangog on offense, so don't really have to worry about it. Mangog offensively likes critical rating or armor pen, and then defense, Pierce for sure. That special 2 is going to hit way harder on the block with that block pen. Man-Thing, Man-Gog, Man-Thing, running out of mans in the game. Uh, Man-Thing, pretty cool champion. I like Man-Thing quite a bit, and I'm happy to have him as a 7-star. I think offensively, critical rating makes the most sense. Man-Thing can actually hit quite hard with his proper ramp-up with the nullifying of buffs, sort of similar to Isophene, where I wouldn't want to use Man-Thing in a non-cosmic buff-heavy matchup, but in those matchups, Man-Thing feels pretty great. And then defensively, I think Pierce is great. Also, increasing his tankiness with armor would not be a bad shout. Mojo, amazing character. Big fan of Mojo. I think the best thing for Mojo offensively, probably the special damage, but honestly, if you wanted to run physical resistance or block proficiency, that would be great too, because Mojo has negative physical resistance, as you can see in the base kit here. So bring that up to almost not negative feels good, and it makes him a lot tankier, and that's what I recommend for defense is to run the physical resistance stat focus. But double physical resistance for Mojo definitely does not feel bad and would make sense because of how low that stat is. Mordo, sort of a unique, interesting, not necessarily exclusive because that loyalty crystal is available to everybody, but Mordo is interesting. I think he's a fun champ, but I haven't used him in a long time, so I don't really have grounds to stand on and where he is in the current meta. But that's besides the point. Mordo does not necessarily need any block proficiency or energy resistance because he has massive resistance while blocking during with his awakened ability. So when you have him awakened, he gains unbelievable energy resistance while blocking. It's kind of insane. So yeah, 6,000 at base, pretty nuts. But offensively speaking, he has a relatively high critical rating. So I don't think the crit rating side focus is a bad thing. I think critical damage would not be a bad thing to run either, since he already has the high critical rating. Special attack damage would also be decent to run for Mordo. And then defensively speaking, I think Pierce is the best thing for him. You're blocking a lot of hits for Mordo, trying to bait heavy attacks, just makes sense. Purgatory, a very recent rank 3 of mine. Huge fan of Purgatory. I think she's amazing. On offense, she doesn't necessarily need the critical rating stat focus. I'm just running that because when you land critical hits with that big fury, it feels pretty nice, but she doesn't necessarily need it. I think running the special damage stat focus makes a lot of sense for her, and also block proficiency would be good on offense. And then defense, anything really works. If you want to bump up her physical resistance so she can have both physical and energy stats on defense, that would be fine. Pierce also makes a lot of sense for Purgatory. Sasquatch, definitely run critical rating. I know he already has a base critical rating that's relatively high, but the more crits you can get with Sassy, the better. So 100% run the critical rating stat focus for Sassy on offense, and then defense, Pierce makes the most sense to me, but you can also run some sort of physical or energy resistance to bump up both of those resistances on defense. Scarlet Witch, this is the Sigil Witch that some people have from the Sigil tokens. I haven't used her in quite a while, but it seems like the best thing to run offensively. Probably special damage. She already has over 30% critical rating on offense, so you don't really need any more critical hits from Scarlet Witch. She will suffer from diminishing returns a little bit. But special damage makes a lot of sense because primarily her damage is coming from special attacks and the damage over time debuff she inflicts during those special attacks. So that's what I recommend for offense. And then defense, she actually has negative physical resistance. So bring that into the positives makes a lot of sense for Scarlet Witch. Moving on to Shatra, awesome character, the Summoner's Choice champion from 2024. She has definitely garnered a pretty big fan base. Obviously, she's the Summoner's Choice champion, so she had a fan base to begin with. But she kind of fell off a little bit in terms of people using her and really recognizing her. But I've seen a Shatra revival as of late, and she's great. I love her. She's a fantastic champion. Offensively, she doesn't necessarily need any specific stat focus, very similar to Kushala, where she doesn't benefit from the critical rating or critical damage rating as other mystics would, because she deals damage to the opponent with damage over time effects. So, armor penetration for Shatra makes a lot of sense. Also, block proficiency, just increasing her tankiness overall. And then defensively, I think energy resistance makes sense. You could also run the physical, so she has both energy and physical on defense. Sorcerer Supreme, Natural Sig 120. Thank you very much, Brian. I appreciate that. Sorcerer, it makes sense to run the critical rating stat focus, but she does have a pretty high critical rating, so you're going to suffer from diminishing returns a little bit. So I would not honestly stray away from the idea of running the special damage stat focus, just because you're already critting way more than the average champion. So increasing your special attack damage, or just armor pen for all of your attacks to gain bonus damage, makes a lot of sense for Sorcerer. And then defensively, she is not a defender, so armor, block pen, whatever. Symbiote Supreme, another Supreme to the family. I think for Symbiote Supreme, you would want to run the critical damage stat focus. Also, block proficiency makes a lot of sense for Sim Supreme. Either of those two makes sense for me in terms of running them on offense. And then defensively, he has a negative physical resistance, so you want to bring that number all the way up to 0, so it's neutraled out. So now he doesn't have the negative, it's just nothing, so he doesn't have positive or negative. So that's what I would recommend for defense for Symbiote Supreme, even though he's not really a defender. Werewolf by Night, one of my favorite mystics in the entire game. So I've got sort of an interesting setup on Werewolf here. I'm actually running the Pierce stat focus for Wolf, and the reason I'm doing that is because Werewolf, you're hitting block a lot of the time when you're building up Werewolf, especially in those situations where maybe you're on hazard shift or maybe you're fighting a champion where you can't directly hit them for whatever reason. Those block hits, that damage adds up. It's not just the ruptures that are dealing damage, it's the hits into the block that you're dealing. So I like running Pierce with Werewolf, but I also see the benefit of running the physical resistance stat focus offensively because Werewolf does have negative physical resistance. So that is obviously what I recommend for defense, is to run the physical resistance stat focus to bring his resistance up from negative 9.2 all the way to 0, so it is just neutral. White Tiger, awesome champion. Super happy to have White Tiger. I should take her to rank 3 at some point. I'm a pretty big fan of White Tiger. If you didn't actually know, I originally voted for White Tiger in the Summoner's Choice vote that Gladiator won, but it was a toss-up for me. I mean, I was on board with any of them winning. I voted White Tiger initially, but I'm very happy with my Gladiator, and I love him at rank 3, Sig 101. But White Tiger is an amazing champion. She doesn't need the critical rating stat focus because she has a big boost to her critical rating within her base kit. So I think critical damage rating and or armor penetration would make a lot of sense for White Tiger. Armor pen specifically seems like it would do a lot for her just because of how often you're using those basic hits to clobber into the opponent. And then defense, she doesn't really need anything in particular. I'm just running Pierce. Wiccan, amazing character. Another champion that's just super solid. I haven't invested in, but I probably should because of how great they are. Wiccan doesn't benefit a lot from the critical rating or critical damage rating stat focus, but he does have a negative physical resistance by a substantial margin. So I think offensively and defensively, it makes sense to run the physical resistance stat focus just to increase his survivability for foreseeable matchups in the future, because having negative 20% physical resistance hurts a lot. You'll notice in like the Necropolis run with Deathless She-Hulk that she just plows through him because he has this negative resistance. So that's what I recommend running for Wiccan. And then we have Wong. So Wong, he definitely doesn't need the critical rating stat focus. I actually think Wong benefits a lot more from something like armor penetration or special damage, just because he has such a high native crit rating. It doesn't necessarily matter to increase his critical rating already because of diminishing returns and how that's going to impact it. So that's what I recommend for offense. And then defense, Pierce is fine, but I think for defense, hold on, I was going to change that to armor pen. No, offense, armor pen, right. Defense, I think running physical resistance makes sense for Wong because he has natively negative physical resistance. So I think that puts me back at the top. Yep, that puts me right back at the top. And then there are 6 champions that I do not own to talk about. So Kindred. Kindred is a defender through and through. So defense, you definitely want to run that Pierce. Offensively, doesn't necessarily matter. Armor pen is fine. Special damage is also fine. Doesn't really matter for Kindred because he is primarily a defender. Rintrah. Obviously, for a 7-star Rintrah, you're going to want to run the critical rating stat focus to boost that critical rating to roughly 20%. Rintrah with crits is a great time. And then defense, I think running the Pierce stat focus makes a lot of sense, but also physical resistance to give him both physical and energy on defense would be a great call for Rintrah. OG Scarlet Witch, I feel like she has a relatively high native crit rating. Yeah, 32%. So she doesn't necessarily need the increased 2 crits even further, but if you want to give it to her, obviously that's totally fine. Offensively, though, I do think armor pen or special damage makes sense for her. Block proficiency also makes a lot of sense. And then defensively, doesn't matter. She's not a defender. Spiral, personal favorite of mine from last year. Really hoping to get a 7-star Spiral at some point. Offensively, I think she benefits quite a bit from the armor penetration stat focus. She doesn't necessarily need the critical hits nor the critical damage rating because all of her damage is primarily coming from those ruptures. But running critical rating makes sense for special attack hits that deal, a lot of damage because of them critting. So definitely not a bad thing to run the critical rating, but I think armor pen makes a lot of sense for her as well. And then defensively, Pierce is fine, armor is fine, anything really works for Spiral. The Destroyer. I would like to get this guy at some point as a 7-star. He's pretty cool. So offensively, I do think critical rating makes the most sense. He has those big Fury passives that you can build up over time, and then once you have them, you've just got them forever. So having more critical rating makes sense with those Fury passives because more crits with big Furies, more damage. And then defensively, I think he should run the physical resistance stat focus. He has negative physical resistance, so bringing it up to almost being in the positives makes a lot of sense for Destroyer. And then finally, in the entire list of this whole class stat focus thing, we have the Hood. So the Hood, really solid champion. I would not mind picking up a version of the Hood once he's in the basic pool. But Hood doesn't necessarily benefit from any specific stat focus because his damage, much like a lot of Mystics, comes from damage over time effects on the opponent. So Hood, it would make sense to run the armor penetration stat focus just to increase all of his hit damage. And then defensively, I think Pierce is fine, just in case you ever push Hood to special 2, it's going to deal more damage. But any of the resistance passives would also make sense for Hood as well. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is every recommended offensive and defensive stat focus for every available champion as of February 2025. So, if you liked this video series, and I really hope that you did, please consider hitting that subscribe button and hitting like. Both of those things are incredibly helpful for the channel and help me out to make more content, and it gets the word out there to the YouTube algorithm that I am making content people are enjoying. So if you could do those 2 things for me, I would be incredibly appreciative of that. Also, be sure to check out the channel next Wednesday, February the 12th, for my full exploration live of the Epic of Pain, the Epoch of Pain. We're doing it from beginning to end live, however long it takes. I will be there doing it 100% exploration. So be sure to check out the channel then, and also on Valentine's Day, I will be live for the Valentine's Day Love is a Battleground sale. So thank you all very much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video. Peace.